Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
Who's your favourite Beatle?
McCartney.
Who's your favourite Beatle?
The same.
George Harrison.
John Lennon.
George Harrison.
John.
Paul. Ringo.
John Lennon, actually.
John Lennon.
I think it's George. John.
I think Johnny Rotten.
Do I have one? I have none. Who's your favourite Beatle?
Kevin Bohan. Good answer. Hey!
Who's your favourite Beatle?
Who are the Beatles?
Hello and welcome to the Icon Factory here in Temple Bar. The Icon Factory is 10 years old this year, and for Culture Night this year 2020 we opened our, here's another clue for you all, a Beatles inspired exhibition by myself and my great friend and artist Marianne O'Dwyer. So come on in. This is for all the people who couldn't make it due to the pandemic at the moment and have asked us to do a virtual tour. So we've Aga here on camera, thank you very much. Marianne couldn't make it in today, so I'm going to give you the tour. So come on in. So first up is our Beatles portraits. And there we have the four lads, done in a slightly psychedelic style, wearing all their psychedelic finery. And so here we have our space-inspired wall. So for this section, I imagined that the Beatles have stopped exploring inner space in their yellow submarine through the use of LSD, and now have a yellow UFO to explore outer space. And this print was inspired by a lot of the cosmonaut USSR propaganda posters at the time. A lot of these illustrations, which date back almost 2 years, are some adventures that the Beatles find themselves while travelling in space in their yellow UFO. This was the very first one out of all the artworks in the exhibition that I done back in 2018. This one we have a starring role from Ziggy Stardust in his space module. Just a quick Beatle fact, on the front of the original Beatles Help album, the Beatles actually spell out the word NUJV and not HELP using semaphores, and there's a reference to that in the artwork. This artwork here is inspired in 2018 by all the artworks surrounding the Repeal the Eighth movement, and without getting into the politics of it, everywhere you looked there was stickers and paste-ups and posters and t-shirts and murals with the number 8. And I was inspired by the Beatles song Revolution 9, which is their crazy sound collage on the White Album. And obviously a lot of the protest marches started in the 60s, so it's a reference to that. Here we have a very special collaboration. At the start of the lockdown, I did some collaborations with children from around Ireland and other places. So friends of mine, Pat and Suzanne, who live in Kildare, their daughter sent me in this drawing. It's called Fight for Candyland. And what I would do with these collaborations, I would bring them into Photoshop and Illustrator and colour them up and add a different spin to them. I'd create a print PDF and I'd email it back, and then Katie Louise could print out her own copies. This print here is just my version of a psychedelic experience. If you stare at this for a few minutes, you'll understand why. And next up is "And Curse Sir Walter Raleigh, He's Such a Stupid Git," which is inspired by John Lennon's song "I'm So Tired" on the Beatles' White Album, and there's a nod to Stanley Kubrick's Doctor Strangelove there as well. This is called "Close Your Eyes and I'll Kiss You," which is a reference to some of the psychedelic posters from the 60s. Then here we have the first wall plaque. It's called "The Mystics Across the Universe," and this is painted by Marianne. And it's almost like the Beatles are a constellation in space. So here we come to three sculptures by Marianne, and this is my favourite here, and it's called "Sergeant Pepper, Collector of Lonely Hearts," which I think is genius. Marianne would be a big Tim Burton fan, and Sleepy Hollow would be one of her favourite films, so there's also a nod to Tim Burton here. And here we have "Free as a Bird," another great little sculpture. So the bird's out of the cage and we've keys hanging there. And then we have, this is a bit of a mouthful, "In case you missed it, I've encased another clue for you all." And there's several different Beatle references in this great sculpture. We have a little sailor here with his help. So he has his safety ring from the water. We have a raccoon here, which is a nod to the Rocky Raccoon song on the White Album. Of course, we've Mr. Mustard here, Mean Mr. Mustard, who has an apple for a head, which is a reference to Apple Records. And in the back, we have "Hey Bulldog." And then we go on to the two John Lennon heads. We bought these in the Dublin Plaster Company, which is on Parnell Street. And this is Marianne's one, and it sort of references steampunk and also John Lennon's love of the surreal. He was a big fan of Alice in Wonderland and the likes of that, and sort of references that. Mine's called "Lenono," and what I did was I got many cuttings of Yoko Ono from different magazines, and I cut them out and collaged them, and it ended up looking like a sort of skull, or a Mexican Day of the Dead skull, and it's a reference to the love John Lennon had for Yoko Ono, who a lot of people blame for breaking up the Beatles, which is bullshit. The Beatles broke up the Beatles. So Marianne is a big fan of folk art, and this will be a great folk art piece. These are wooden spoon heads, so we have Paul, Ringo, John and George. This is a great piece, really like this. And then we have our three paintings, and they're on board, so paint on board, and each of them has several different lyric references. So she was listening to some playlists and being inspired by a lot of the Beatles songs, with "Strawberry Fields Forever," "Hey Bulldog," "Blackbird," "She's Leaving Home," "All You Need Is Love," "Baby You Can Drive My Car," "Piggies," "I Am the Walrus," "I Am the Eggman," "Dead Dog with Custard Dripping from His Eye." And then we come to the Caravaggio paintings, and these are photo collages. So I pictured if the Beatles were musicians back in the 1600s, Caravaggio would definitely be their court painter. And there's a lot of stories behind these, but with Paul here as the boy with basket. And this artwork references the notoriously bad business deals that Brian Epstein made regarding the Beatles' merchandise. And they reckon they lost over $100 million in the American market alone. There was a lot of tat with Beatles images on it released during the initial run of Beatlemania. It was unprecedented at the time, so Brian Epstein wasn't to know how lucrative this market was to be, but the Beatles lost millions. We've Cynthia and Yoko as Mary Magdalene and Martha. the two loves of John Lennon's life. Cynthia lost John to Yoko Ono, and unfortunately Yoko Ono lost John when he was assassinated, and this piece reflects that. We've John here as young sick Bacchus, and this artwork explores the more druggy side of the Beatles myth. We have John here in obligatory rock star sunglasses. And here we have a tube of Preludin tablets, which is the speed they took in Hamburg. And the JB Scotch they used to drink before famously being introduced to marijuana by Bob Dylan. We have While My Sitar Gently Weeps. So that's a reference to the Beatles, especially George's love of Indian music. And here it's a bit of exploring the darker side of the Beatles myth, and we have David and Goliath here represented by Ringo and Pete Best. Pete Best being the original drummer that was sacked very shortly before they became famous. We have incredulous St. Thomas, so Christ You Know It Ain't Easy, which is a reference to the ballad of John and Yoko. Here we have one of the favourites of the show, the Savoy Truffle, or also known as My Sweet Lord, and it's a reference to the song Savoy Truffle from the White Album. And this song was written by George for his friend Eric Clapton, who was a chocoholic. And the lyrics are a list of chocolates from the Good News chocolate range made by Macintosh back in the 60s. And here is Caravaggio's The Musicians updated for the Beatles. I threw in some of the tat we discussed earlier and one or two clues to the Beatles myth, such as the Paul McCartney is dead. And last we have my wall plaque, which is called Lord Kitchener's Valets, and this is a reference to the clothes shop in London. I was Lord Kitchener's valet, which was where everyone bought a lot of the army uniforms, which were quite big during the 60s, and their Victorian clothes. This was inspired by the kitsch artwork and psychedelic artwork of the 60s, and also by, if anyone knows me, I'm a big fan of Aboriginal art, and I gave a nod to that there. And it's all done with pearlescent paint, and I wanted to make it as kitsch as possible, and I think I succeeded. So that's our Beatles exhibition here in the Icon Factory in Temple Bar. I'd like to thank you all on behalf of myself and Marianne, John and Paul and George and Ringo.